Hey everyone, we have a very quick lesson to do on style. This is after you read chapter 13, and I think this is coming at a great time. It's after our first essay, it's before the second essay, and this will allow us to implement some of these techniques into our writing. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, I am going to discuss style in a general way of, what it even means. So just a general definition, style is the way you use language, in particular in an argument. So there's three types of categories to determine somebody's style. Number one, we have the high style. This is the very formal way of writing. This is usually for serious topics. Obviously, if you're going to write about the death penalty, you are probably going to use the high style. Then we have the middle style. This is clear and ordinary type of writing. We get this often in editorials, a lot of times opinion pieces in the newspaper. I would say this type of writing is a little bit more pleasant to read for the audience just because you can allow more of your voice to emerge. Then we have the low style, and please don't confuse low to mean somehow connotatively bad. That's not really what it means. Low style is more of an informal style. It happens to be a little bit more conversational. A lot of times the humorous type of writing uses the low style. Now, I'm asking you at the bottom, what is your style? Because, sometimes it's hard for a student to figure this out. I think that for myself, I write in the middle style. Most of the time, I do a combination of middle and low simply because sometimes I want to write in a way that is going to reflect the way that I speak. And I want to maybe incorporate a few jokes in there. So I might do like an occasional LOL or an occasional haha. But if I am going to be writing an essay, I aim for more of like a combination of the high and the middle. So it's good to ask yourself this question, what style do I generally use when I write a certain document? Now, another important point to stress is that when you are developing your own style of writing, you want to pay attention to three things. Number one is your word choice. This is your diction. This is important to stress because, the way that you use words, your vocabulary, is really going to be a reflection of the writing style that you have. Let me give you an example. Look at the first example here. The government needs to pass laws and stuff like that in order to make a change. Now notice that your vocabulary, using dead language, using imprecise language, using vague language, is going to be a reflection of your style. So this creates more of like I guess you could say creates more of a distance between the reader and the writer. The reader is not able to relate to language that is imprecise. The fact that women can vote now is so bomb. Now notice that you can also use slang language, words that are used in conversation, but generally, they are not used in writing. So your word choice is important. It's going to create a certain impression in the reader's mind as they read your work. Next is sentence structure, your syntax. Now I put over here, adding variety to your sentences also helps to develop an interesting style of writing. When I say variety, is your sentences should not stylistically sound the same. I have an example here just to demonstrate. The nervous student held the cheat sheet in his hands. Then he sat in the very back of the classroom. Then he placed the sheet on his lap while looking around cautiously. Next, he took his test and slouched over it so the teacher wouldn't suspect anything. Next, he started the test. Then Next, do you notice like there's almost a certain, pattern, a rhythmic pattern? It's extremely boring to read sentences like this because every sentence basically sounds the same. You want to sometimes add a little bit of variety in the way that you are structuring your sentence. So yes, subject and verb has to be in the sentence, but you could always use subordinate clauses. You can always use contractions. You can always use just different kinds of writing so that it's not always the same repetition. And finally, punctuation. So I put your choice of punctuation can also have stylistic effects. I found this online. I had to share it because I think it's funny. Now notice the punctuation. The sentence, as far as the words are concerned, each sentence is the same, but the punctuation is different. Woman, without her, man is nothing. Woman without her man is nothing. Now, I read it the way that it's supposed to be read, but notice that each choice of punctuation is determining the kind of pause and the kind of emphasis you are supposed to put in your sentence. So yes, putting that occasional comma in your sentence is going to have more of a stylistic effect. Maybe using a semicolon so that you add a longer pause is also going to affect your style. So those are the 3 things to watch out for. And now we are ready to practice. Now, I'm gonna, I tried to limit this because, this isn't English 102 where we spent a great deal of time on figurative language. But I did pull out 6 of these techniques so that we can look at an example of each one and then practice. So at the end of all this, I'm going to have you guys do a very quick practice of each technique. Now, why should we use some of these techniques? Because they help to create a more engaging style, a style that is interesting to read, a style that famous authors use. So I definitely want you guys to aim for using some of these techniques whenever you write your next essay. Now, without further ado, let us begin with simile. So what is a simile? A simile is a comparison using like or as. I gave you guys an example. You can read the whole poem. I think it's lovely, but I'm just going to emphasize the first stanza. The poem title is A Red, Red Rose by Robert Burns. And Robert Burns writes, "My love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. My love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune." Now, forget the rhyme, forget everything else that makes this poem so lovely. Just look at the simile. Look at the comparison. My love is like, my love is like. And what is his love like? Number 1, a rose. Number 2, a melody. It's a beautiful way of writing, drawing the reader's attention on a comparison just to make the idea that you're trying to project a little bit stronger. That's simile. Number 2, metaphor. Now, what you can think of metaphor as a stronger simile. A metaphor does not use words like or as. It's a comparison that equates 2 things. So you're dropping language that is lessening the comparison, and you're strengthening the comparison by equating the 2 things that you are trying to compare. Now, this is a scene that's from Romeo and Juliet. I'm sure it's familiar to a lot of you. This happens right before the "Oh, Romeo, Romeo" moment. So Romeo is, looking for Juliet, and he sees her. He's kind of stalking her, and he says, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." Now notice that the 2 things that are being compared are Juliet and the sun. And he's not just saying Juliet is bright like the sun. He is saying Juliet is the sun. And it's absolutely beautiful. The comparison becomes a lot stronger. Number 2, metaphor. Number 3 is analogy. Now, an analogy is an extended simile or metaphor. Now, what does that mean? When you take a simile or a metaphor and you stretch it, you're going to have an analogy. And when you stretch it, you're basically adding more detail to the comparison. You're trying to show the relationship between the pairs of things that you are comparing. And if we have to take it at levels, simile is the weaker level, metaphor is a little bit stronger, analogy is the strongest. So I have 3 examples for you guys to think about. Number 1 is from George Orwell's short story called A Hanging. And notice the analogy here. They crowded very close about him, with their hands always on him, in a careful, caressing grip, as though all the while feeling him to make sure he was there. It was like men handling a fish, which is still alive and may jump back into the water. So this description of the scene is basically a crowd that is leading a man to his death, because he's about to be publicly hanged, and they're basically, forcefully holding on to him and leading him to the place where he's going to, receive that public hanging. And that moment where it says it was like men handling a fish which is still alive and may jump back in the water, that's just your attention is supposed to go on the relationship between the 2 things. The man that is heading for his death and a fish that's just struggling to be alive. Now, second example by Don Marquis. Writing a book of poetry is like dropping a rose petal down the Grand Canyon and waiting for the echo. I mean, isn't that just beautiful? Because we know that poetry is, a lot of it is subtle. A lot of it is in, seeing the truth in between the lines. It's not going to be such an obvious bang in your face. It is like a rose petal. And, it's the point behind it might not be as obvious. And the comparison of dropping a rose petal down the Grand Canyon and waiting for the echo is just absolutely beautiful. So well written. Lastly, this is just a joke. Dumb, gorgeous people should not be allowed to use literature when competing in the pickup pool. It's like bald people wearing hats. So a bald person wearing a hat creates a sort of deception, right? Here, the deception is that underneath the hat, there's a whole head of hair. And then, people who use literature when they're trying to come on to someone, the pickup pool is basically just, like the dating scene where you try to come on to somebody like a stranger that you're trying to get their number or trying to get a date. And, if you go up to them and you use literature to show how smart you are, the comparison is to bald people who wear hats. So those are 3 examples of analogies. Next, rhetorical questions. These are questions that don't require answers. And you're probably wondering, well, then what's the point of asking the question? So the function of a rhetorical question is for emphasis. It's to add depth. It's to add strength to your argument. So I gave you guys, these are not original examples, but I gave you guys some that are like really funny. If the number 2 pencil is the most popular, why is it still number 2? Again, a question that's not meant to be answered. Why are softballs hard? So true. I love this one. Marriage is a wonderful institution, but who would want to live in an institution? Isn't it a bit unnerving that doctors call what they do practice? And I love that last one, I think, is my favorite. So all of these are meant for emphasis. Notice these are questions that don't need to be answered. They're there for stylistic effect. Next is irony. I love irony. I often write with irony. I think irony can be used as a technique when you want to point out the fact that sometimes life throws these contradictions our way. Sometimes life throws these like, oh my God, moments our way. These moments when you expect life to go one way, but then it goes another way. And honestly, I could not think of a better example than Alanis Morissette's song Ironic. Now, I put the link for you guys. I am going to make the slideshow available for you. The link is to the YouTube video. Please go ahead and watch you don't even need to watch the video, just listen to the lyrics. And notice each stanza, she is giving us an example of irony. An old man turns 98, wins the lottery, and then dies the next day. I mean, there's all these moments that are contradictory in life, and that is the beauty of irony. So I thought, you guys could listen to the song, and this would be the perfect example of irony. And finally, parallelism. Now, parallelism is basically the use of repetition. Now, you're probably thinking, wait a second, repetition is not good. If we're writing an essay, we don't want to repeat ourselves all the time. No, you're absolutely right. You don't want to repeat yourself. But when you repeat yourself in a grammatical way for stylistic effect, it becomes very beautiful. Repetition is actually a technique that is used in poetry, and it's lovely. Sometimes it's used in just literature as well. So what I'm trying to say is that when repetition is being used in a way that is emphasizing the parallel structure that's in sentences, and it's done for a special effect, like just to create emphasis or for a certain style, it can actually be really beautiful. So here's some examples. Immature poets imitate, mature poets steal. Notice that there is a certain repetition in the two segments here, but again, look at the emphasis. Jesse Jackson, he said, today's students can put dope in their veins or hope in their brains. If they can conceive it and believe it, they can achieve it. They must know it is not their aptitude, but their attitude that will determine their altitude. I mean, it sounds like a rap song. It's not. It's beautiful. And notice that some of the sentences, they have a parallel effect. If they can conceive it and believe it, they can achieve it. And it's absolutely beautiful. The more we do, the more we can do. Beautiful. I came, I saw, I conquered. All of you know this, I'm sure. This is a very classic line, but look at the parallelism in that line. And I mean, I had to throw R. Kelly in there. If I can see it, then I can do it. If I just believe it, there's nothing to it. I believe I can fly. So there's R. Kelly for you using parallelism in his song. Now, finally, what do I want you to do for this really short activity? You guys, I'm looking for one original example of each technique. There are 6 techniques total: simile, metaphor, analogy, rhetorical question, irony, and parallelism. Only one example is what I am requiring. If you want to do 2, just in case, if you're insecure about your example, you're like, just in case if this one misses the mark, let me think of another one. Please feel free, but I am only requiring one example. The only warning I would like to give you is do not plagiarize. Do not copy off the internet. Do not copy off of anyone, in fact. And don't use examples that are already cliche, that they're already in existence. We've already heard them a zillion times. Life is like a box of chocolates. Please do not use that. And do not use other examples that are just like that. I am looking for you to come up with your own original, unique example, just one example of each technique, and this discussion will be complete. So good luck, everyone, and please let me know if you have any questions at all.